What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Windrose, an upcoming survival craft pirate game that sees you navigating a bunch of islands and trying to track down none other than Blackbeard himself. But I'm actually bringing you this video via a public demo that was launched on Steam a few days ago. So if you want to check out any of this for yourself, you can, and I would actually recommend you do so because it's a pretty good experience, but obviously there's some things to know there first. Starting with the fact that this game used to go by the name Crosswind. So if you haven't heard of Windrose, you may have heard of Crosswind, which was getting some press and things, I believe towards the end of last year actually, before this name change ahead of the public demo drop. On top of that, other things you may want to know is that the demo will not carry your progress over to the full game or anything. However, some of the co-op elements are there, but not in full as well. So because of all that, I wasn't going to get super deep into the crafting and dedicate a whole ton of time to it. But this, in fact, did do what demos are meant to do, which is inspire me to play more of this game. And now I am deeply interested in the release of this thing. And I guess because at least in part, it reminds me a lot of the Risen games. Except, honestly, a lot smoother even here in the demo, which is, I guess, as good a place as any to start. The demo ran very well for me. There was some clunkiness in terms of combat, but I do have some, I would say, questions about how intentional some of that is. Some of this is clearly down to progression, and so seeing the early parts of the game and how that works in this demo might be a very different situation from how combat works in the end game of the full release, as an example. But other than some stuff like that, which may be down to fine-tuning ahead of its eventual release, the demo did run quite well and I didn't have any problems there. However, when you first fire the demo up, you're going to have to create a character. The character creation for this seems pretty robust to me, plenty of options. I'll be the first person to tell you I'm not huge on cosmetic character creation personally, but you can customize a character with all sorts of sliders and different options to make the pirate of your dreams, I suppose. And then after that, you're hit with a little bit of backstory. So despite this being a survival craft game, there is a story. Basically, Blackbeard is terrorizing the Caribbean for some sort of artifact as he's clearly meddling with dark powers. In fact, this is in full swing by the time the game starts, and what you're trying to do is actually sneak around his fleet so you can just sort of get out of harm's way as you don't want any part of it. That does not go according to plan, and your ship gets attacked, which is how you wound up washed up ashore on a deserted island, needing to, of course, survival craft your way into some survival. In particular, kind of the usual stuff. You build up your workbench, your basic resources, get some upgrades going, get some proper equipment on you, and then you can start fighting some enemies around and undertaking, everything else we're out to do. But this is where it gets interesting, because after a little bit of time on the initial small island you wash up on, and by the way, the map for the game you are playing is procedurally generated, so it won't be the same every time, but either way, after a little bit of time, the doctor from your crew arrives on the island, because while you were sort of tossed ashore, the rest of your crew isn't entirely dead either. Some of them were taken captive on a nearby island, which you can go rescue them, but he's also going to bring with him a small ship. This is going to be your first access to the open sea and give you access to the shipwrecks you're going to need to get your actual first ship, which is going to be a big proper ship and everything. However, you're going to have to find a shipwreck on the next island over and fix it up and get it seaworthy and hopefully release some of your crew while you're at it. Which then, of course, leads to a big revenge quest against Blackbeard himself, and in order to do that, you're going to have to build up your character and your pirate empire. So now let's talk a little bit about that. So first up, travel and everything. It's important to mention that you're probably going to want to put a fast travel bell on each individual island. Now, the first island you are on will have a few different sort of points of interest that you can explore and get some of your important upgrades. One of those is going to be a fast travel bell. You're going to want to put one of these on every single island because, A, you can only have 10 of them at once, but also this is what is going to allow you to quickly travel between islands as opposed to having to literally sail between them every single time. And that's important because you do have to run back to your corpse if you die. And so if you don't have a respawn set nearby where you died, because you can only have one of those as well, that is going to be a hassle. Feel free to ask me how I know, but the answer does seem a little obvious. Otherwise, you'll be running around and exploring these islands. Now, when it comes to the actual building, some of it's very basic. You play enough of these games, they all kind of work the same way. But I will say a few things that I like in general. One, the upgrades to your gathering and your weapons and armor and stuff, that stuff is permanent. There doesn't seem to be any durability associated with it, which is what I liked. So once you've upgraded your axes and your pickaxes and your shovel, etc., you've got it. You don't need to worry about making more of them. And what's more, if you die, they're not dropped with your items as well. So once you have these, you have them. Also, there are some prefabricated structures for you. So if you're like me, you may not necessarily like snapping things together in order to make buildings, and while I can appreciate the customizable options that come with that kind of thing, sometimes I just want to pop a house up because I'm not terribly interested in how it looks. And this game does, in fact, have a few prefabricated buildings if you want to just throw something up quickly and focus more on the progression aspects of it. Now, as with any survival craft game, we're also going to have to build things like various workshops and benches in order to gather up all the resources on these islands we find ourselves on, which will include even plumbing the depths of little dungeons and things to get at ore like copper. And doing all of that allows you to upgrade your equipment into armor that is actually useful, upgrade your inventory by getting better backpacks, and if you explore some of these ruins, you may even find some necklaces and equipment to throw on otherwise. But what is some of that gear we can equip? Well, this is where things get interesting because we've got melee weapons and firearms. I will say the combat itself is a little clunky. As I mentioned, it's hard to say how much better this gets with progression, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but just throwing that out there again. You'll start out with a few basic weapons, but it's my understanding that in the late game, there will be things like halberds, great swords, muskets, as opposed to just pistols, that kind of thing. Pistols and muskets you do actually have to make ammo for as well, so do keep that in mind, obviously. But each of those melee weapons seems to scale off of a different stat. So as you're doing everything I just described, you will be leveling up and the like, and it looks like that is going to be attributes and talents. Attributes are going to be one of your damage attributes on top of the more general ones like health, stamina, and critical hit chance. Obviously, the higher they go, the better for that associated thing. Talents are a little more interesting to me because it looks like you'll be able to specialize a sort of build this way. That's important because, of course, the different types of weapons, be they two-handed, one-handed, firearms, etc., or, even down to the armor and stuff you're using, can be augmented through these talents, and if those in the release version are impactful enough to, really impact the combat in a meaningful way, I think that will be interesting. And all of that is sort of the, I would say, core stuff to know. You, of course, are going to build up your pirate empire, gather up followers and stuff, get your ship up and running, get proper settlements, harvesting resources, putting some of those crew to work, upgrading your equipment, giving yourself better and better weapons and everything to deal with this stuff, and of course track down Blackbeard as you go. And yet, we're not quite done, because there are some other aspects to just exploration as well. So for starters, as I mentioned, procedurally generated biomes when you create the world that you're going to find yourself playing in. Now that will include things like difficulty, and you can freely adjust via sliders, like how much damage and stuff enemies are doing on that world, so that may be something to keep in mind if you're not vibing with the combat specifically. But in the full release, what you're also going to be able to do is go to settlements and interact with different factions. They specifically mention places like Tortuga and the smugglers and the like that you'll be interacting with. You see, in exploring some of these islands, you're going to find dungeons and chests and the like, and you're going to gather up resources, some of which can be specifically traded to these factions, or if you kill Blackbeard's pirates, they drop a currency that mentions being able to be turned in Tortuga. So there will be elements of interacting with the world in those ways, but we haven't seen, I would say, the full scope of that via this demo just yet. But then there's the slightly supernatural elements. Now, the story and everything heavily implies that Blackbeard is involved in something sort of occult and strange, and that's what the story is going to be about and why you're kind of tracking him down to begin with. And we see a little bit of that kind of thing in the demo with the undead and the like walking around, strange things happening in ruins, etc., etc. So there is this sort of pirate-flavored occult stuff happening in the background, which I also thought was interesting and added just a sort of mystique to the entire experience. But to sort of start wrapping this up and talk a little bit about my own thoughts on this one, I thoroughly enjoyed this demo, much more than I was really expecting to be honest. And I think for me it's going to come down to how much interaction is there with different factions, side content, etc.? Are there like proper side quests even? And how interesting is this story going to wind up being, and what the sort of end goal there is? And then the associated like side content, if they can sort of nail the things to do outside of just building and crafting, while also of course, that being an integral part of the game. But if they can tack enough like interesting side content and a main story on top of that thing and make the progression interesting, that and co-op leaves me pretty excited for this game, to be honest. Which is about as much as you can ask for from a demo specifically. So with all of that said, I thought this was really cool. Hopefully you will as well. And to that end, I'm now actually looking forward to the release of this game and seeing what they do with it, and I do plan on playing more of it then. However, for today, I think that's pretty much everything I've got to say, so if you did enjoy the video, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.